In a deceptive, sun-drenched calm of a seemingly ordinary suburban neighborhood, nestled amidst rows of well-kept homes and the murmur of everyday life, a sudden, jarring event disrupted the peaceful routine. It began with an urgent call to local authorities, a report that cut through the mundane quiet. A child was missing. Such calls are always treated with immediate gravity, sparking an almost instinctive surge of concern. Typically, these situations resolve with a sigh of relief, a child found safe and sound after a brief, anxious period. But the response to this particular address, a house that outwardly blended into the tapestry of the street, would defy every expectation and plunge the responding officers into a reality far more chilling than any they had ever encountered. As the patrol car pulled up to the curb, a subtle unease began to prickle at the officers. The house itself seemed to possess a peculiar stillness, an almost unsettling silence that stood in stark contrast to the lively hum of the surrounding neighborhood. Its windows, perpetually curtained or obscured, offered no glimpse into the interior, giving the impression of a place deliberately cloaked in shadow, a secret held tight against the outside world. It was a house that seemed to recoil from the sunlight, hinting at a hidden, disquieting truth within its walls. Stepping from their vehicle, the officers were immediately assaulted by a sensory shock that transcended mere visual discomfort. A profound, sickening odor permeated the very air around the property, a thick, cloying stench that was a vile amalgam of decay, pervasive filth, and something subtly chemical, hinting at deeper, more disturbing elements. It was a smell that clung, that promised decay, and was undeniably out of place in such an otherwise immaculate suburban setting. This putrid aroma wasn't just unpleasant. It was a physical barrier, an invisible cloud that signaled profound neglect and something deeply wrong. Pushing through a flimsy, unlocked front door that creaked open reluctantly, the officers crossed a threshold not into a home, but into a scene of unimaginable squalor. The interior was a chaotic, suffocating landscape of unmitigated disarray, a tableau of human neglect that defied comprehension. Every surface was buried under layers of garbage, rotting food, and accumulated debris. What should have been clear walkways were instead narrow, treacherous paths winding through towering, unstable piles of refuse, forcing the officers to navigate carefully to avoid dislodging further filth. Amongst the detritus, glimpses of forgotten belongings, broken toys, and unspeakable grime emerged, each item telling a silent story of abandonment. The air inside was thick, stagnant, and heavy with dust motes that danced in the anemic shafts of light piercing through grimy windows. This dim illumination served only to highlight the pervasive coating of grime that coated every single surface, from the walls to floors, from the furniture to the very air itself. There were no signs of normal habitation, no semblance of the everyday rhythms of family life. No clean dishes, no neatly folded laundry, no personal touches that spoke of care or comfort. This was not a place where life was lived in joy or even quiet routine. It was a monument of profound, systemic neglect, a space where basic human needs have been utterly disregarded for an extended, horrifying period. The silence within these walls was profound, broken only by the crunch of debris under the officers' heavy boots and their own strained, disbelieving breathing. It was a silence that spoke volumes, echoing the absence of laughter, of play, of parental comfort. The initial call had been for a missing child, but it was clear, even in these agonizing first moments, that this was far more than a simple disappearance. This was a discovery of unimaginable proportions, a chilling tableau that hinted at a life lived in conditions no child should ever endure. The search for the missing child had just begun, but the true, terrifying horrors of the house and the lives lived within its decaying confines were only just beginning to reveal themselves. Each step deeper into the house brought a fresh wave of revulsion, a stark realization that they had stumbled upon something profoundly, unspeakably wrong, a silent scream frozen in the filth and decay. The missing child was no longer just a missing person. They were a potential victim of the grim, silent testimony of this house of horrors. The first moments inside the house were disorienting, a shock to every sense. The pervasive odor was a physical assault, a constant reminder of the decay that permeated every inch of the structure. The officers, trained to maintain composure in the face of grim scenes, found their professional detachment challenged by the sheer scale of the squalor. What began as a search for a missing child quickly transformed into an investigation of unimaginable proportions, driven by an escalating sense of dread. Navigating the interior was a hazardous undertaking. The pathways described earlier were not merely cluttered. They were labyrinthine tunnels carved through mountains of household waste. Rotting food scraps were fused into the carpet, attracting swarms of insects that buzzed relentlessly in the stagnant air. Every surface, from tables and counters to the very floors themselves, was coated in layers of sticky, dark grime, the accumulated filth of years. The officers stepped carefully, their boots sinking slightly into saturated areas, their eyes scanning for anything that might indicate the missing child's presence or the presence of any children at all. As they moved deeper into the house, room by room, the initial shock gave way to a chilling realization of prolonged neglect and abuse. This wasn't merely a messy home. It was a carefully constructed prison of squalor. In what might once have been a living room, furniture was broken and upturned, covered in stains and mildew. The air was thick with a suffocating smell of stale urine and human waste, indicating a complete disregard for basic hygiene. Here, amidst the refuse, officers found the first clear signs of deliberate confinement, what appeared to be makeshift restraints, fashioned from ropes and old belts, were crudely attached to bed frames and door handles. These were not props. They were instruments, clearly designed to restrict movement, to hold someone captive for extended periods. The sight of them sent a cold shiver through even the most hardened officers, imagining the small bodies that might have been bound there, trapped in the darkness and the filth. The discovery of these restraints was a turning point. It shifted the investigation from a missing child case to a potential criminal enterprise, one rooted in unimaginable suffering. As they moved into a dimly lit bedroom, ostensibly a child's, the horror intensified. The walls, rather than displaying cheerful wallpaper or family photographs, were adorned with a disturbing collection of drawings. These weren't the joyful, innocent scribbles typical of childhood. They were crude, frantic sketches, often depicting stick figures with exaggerated, distressed expressions, enclosed by cages or surrounded by dark, menacing shapes. Some drawings showed figures with tears streaming down their faces, or tiny hands reaching out from behind bars. Others were simply black and white, filled with chaotic lines that conveyed overwhelming fear and despair. These were silent screams, expressions of trauma too profound for verbal articulation, laid bare in crayon and pencil. They spoke of confinement, of isolation, and of an inner world tormented by fear. The officers meticulously photographed each drawing, understanding that these were not just pictures, but crucial, heartbreaking glimpses into the daily realities of the children who had lived here. The children's sleeping arrangements were equally horrifying. In one small room, 2 soiled mattresses lay directly on the floor, devoid of sheets or blankets, their surfaces deeply stained and emitting a pungent odor. There were no toys, no books, no comforting objects, only the bare, grim necessities of survival, if they could even be called that. The remnants of what might have been food were scattered on the floor, mere crumbs suggesting chronic hunger. The water in the bathroom sink was a murky brown, and the toilet was overflowing, its contents spilling onto the floor, creating a swarm of unsanitary conditions that made basic human dignity impossible. This wasn't just neglect. It was an active denial of fundamental human needs, forcing individuals to live in conditions that would be unacceptable even for animals. In another area, makeshift barriers, seemingly fashioned from broken furniture and scrap wood, further highlighted the cruel intention to confine. These barriers were not designed to keep someone out, but to keep someone in, transforming parts of the house into isolated, suffocating cells. The lack of any clean water source or accessible, functioning bathroom facilities meant the children were forced to live in their own waste, a grim testimony to their constant suffering. The very air they breathed was contaminated, heavy with the stench of sickness and decay, a silent poison slowly eroding their health and spirits. The officers, their faces grim, continued their methodical search, each discovery building upon the last, painting an increasingly grotesque picture of life within these walls. The silence in the house, once merely unsettling, now felt like a heavy shroud, pressing down on them, reflecting the unspoken suffering that had permeated every hour of every day for these children. This was not a quick, isolated act of cruelty. This was a sustained, calculated campaign of deprivation and torment. The search for the missing child was no longer just about locating them. It was about rescuing them and any other children trapped in this unspeakable nightmare. The House of Horrors had revealed its true nature, and the full extent of the children's plight was becoming tragically, undeniably clear. The investigators understood that they had stumbled upon a scene of profound human depravity, a place where innocence had been systematically eroded, and where basic human rights had been utterly annihilated, leaving behind only the chilling evidence of prolonged and agonizing abuse. The shocking discoveries within the house were immediately relayed to additional units and investigators. What began as a missing child report had escalated into a full-scale criminal investigation, demanding a wider net of inquiry. While forensic teams meticulously documented the squalor and the evidence of confinement, detectives began the arduous task of gathering information from the outside, turning their attention to the seemingly oblivious neighborhood. Initially, neighbors expressed profound shock, their faces etched with disbelief and horror. The very idea that such unspeakable atrocities could have occurred behind the facade of a seemingly ordinary house on their quiet street was an unsettling assault on their perception of reality. Many reported rarely seeing the children, a fact that, in hindsight, became chillingly significant. The blinds were always drawn, the doors remained shut, and there was a pervasive sense of isolation emanating from the property. Some neighbors vaguely recalled brief glimpses of a child, perhaps fleetingly in a window or quickly ushered inside, but these moments were rare and fleeting, easily dismissed as a family's preference for privacy. They spoke of the mother, often describing her as reclusive, sometimes irritable, but never openly abusive or overtly suspicious. The foul odor, they admitted, had occasionally been noticeable, particularly on warm days, but it was often attributed to plumbing issues or simply a general lack of tidiness, easily rationalized away by the desire to believe in the best of their community. The truth was a dark secret that festered in plain sight, hidden by walls and a collective reluctance to peer too deeply into the lives of others. The neighbors' testimonies, though lacking direct knowledge of abuse, collectively painted a picture of extreme isolation, a deliberate severing of the children from the outside world. The truly harrowing revelation, however, came from the surviving children themselves. Once located and removed from a nightmare of the house, they were immediately whisked away to a secure, comforting environment where medical personnel and child psychologists awaited. The initial assessment confirmed severe physical deprivation and emotional trauma. Their small bodies were the unmistakable marks of neglect. Skeletal frames, sunken eyes, skin marred by untreated rashes, old bruises, and open sores. Their hair was matted, their hygiene profoundly compromised. Many suffered from malnutrition. Their system starved of essential nutrients, leading to developmental delays that were immediately apparent. Some struggled with basic motor skills, while others showed signs of stunted growth, a physical manifestation of years of deprivation. The psychological toll was even more heartbreaking. These children, some of whom had never known a life outside those horrifying walls, exhibit a range of deeply disturbing behaviors. Some were withdrawn, unable to make eye contact, their small voices barely audible whispers. Others displayed extreme fear, flinching at sudden movements or loud noises, their every action a testament to a life lived in constant terror. They showed an almost feral distrust of adults, their eyes darting with suspicion, their instincts honed by years of threat. Communication was a profound challenge. Their vocabulary was limited, their understanding of the outside world severely distorted. They struggled to articulate their experiences, not because they couldn't remember, but because the trauma was too immense, too overwhelming to package into conventional language. Through patient, gentle sessions with child psychologists and social workers, utilizing techniques like play therapy and art therapy, fragments of their daily lives began to emerge. The stories they shared, though often fragmented and nonlinear, painted a grim, consistent picture of their existence within that house. Life was a relentless cycle of starvation and physical abuse. Meals were rare, often consisting of meager, unidentifiable scraps or even spoiled food. The children spoke of constant hunger, a gnawing emptiness that defined their every waking moment. They learned to hide food, to hoard it, to scrounge for anything edible within the filthy confines of their prison. This perpetual starvation weakened their bodies and dulled their minds, leaving them with little energy to resist or even hope. Physical abuse was a terrifying, arbitrary reality. Punishments were severe and often inflicted for trivial or imagined transgressions. They spoke of beatings with belts, bare hands, or whatever objects were within reach. They described being struck for crying, for speaking, for simply existing. These beatings left behind not just physical wounds, but deep internal scars of fear and chronic pain. The children recounted being forced to remain still for hours, tied with ropes or belts of furniture, enduring excruciating discomfort and isolation. The makeshift restraints found by officers were not an occasional measure. They were a tool of daily control, forcing the children into prolonged periods of stillness and silence, denying the freedom of movement essential for their development. Beyond the physical torment, the children endured relentless psychological torment. They spoke of being subjected to verbal abuse, constant degradation, and threats that instilled a deep-seated terror. They were told they were worthless, that they were burdens, that no one outside would ever care for them. This constant stream of negative reinforcement eroded their self-worth, making them believe that their suffering was deserved, that they were inherently bad. They were denied access to education, to toys, to any form of stimulating interaction. Their only companions were often each other, and sometimes the silent, pervasive fear that was their constant shadow. They knew nothing of school, of friendships, of playgrounds, or the simple comforts that define a healthy childhood. Their world was confined to the putrid, chaotic rooms of that house, a universe of neglect and cruelty. The drawings found on the walls became even more poignant in light of their testimony. They were not just expressions of fear, but literal depictions of their daily reality, their only means of communicating the unspeakable horrors they were forced to endure and a complete lack of safety and love that characterized their existence. The truth emerging from these tiny, traumatized voices was not just horrifying, it was a devastating indictment of a mother's profound betrayal. As the horrifying truth of the children's ordeal began to solidify through their courageous, albeit fragmented, testimonies and the stark evidence from the house, the focus of the investigation inevitably shifted to the architect of their suffering. Their mother. Law enforcement and social services had a clear picture of the crime, but the critical question remained. Why? What could drive a parent to inflict such sustained, unspeakable cruelty upon their own children? Investigators delved deep into her background, meticulously peeling back the layers of her life in an attempt to understand the motivations behind such profound evil. Her name was Sarah. On the surface, to casual acquaintances or distant relatives, she might have appeared unremarkable, perhaps just a withdrawn or eccentric individual. But a deeper look into her past quickly revealed a disturbing and consistent history of mental health issues. Records indicated a long-standing struggle with severe, untreated psychological disorders, including documented cases of depression and potential personality disorders that had gone unaddressed for years. There were sporadic reports from past employers hinting at erratic behavior, sudden outbursts of anger, and an inability to maintain stable relationships. Family members, when finally interviewed, spoke of a woman who had always been distant, unpredictable, and prone to volatile mood swings, but none had ever suspected the depths of her cruelty. They recounted instances where she had isolated herself, cut off contact, and vehemently resisted any attempts by others to intervene or offer help. It became clear that her mental state was not just an underlying factor, but profound, debilitating condition that distorted her perception of reality and warped her capacity for empathy and care. Beyond her mental health struggles, a disturbing pattern of abusive behavior began to emerge, not just towards her own children, but predating their birth. There were veiled accounts of cruelty towards pets in her youth, isolated incidents of unexplained injuries to younger siblings or cousins that had been dismissed as accidents, and a general history of controlling and manipulative tendencies in her relationships. These fragmented pieces, once viewed as isolated anomalies, now coalesce into a chilling portrait of a person with a deeply ingrained propensity for inflicting harm, a pattern that escalated and found its ultimate, horrifying outlet in the lives of her defenseless children. The children, caught in her twisted reality, bore the full brunt of her unchecked impulses and profound pathology. When investigators finally confronted Sarah, the most shocking revelation was not a violent outburst or a desperate plea for mercy. It was her chilling lack of remorse. Her demeanor during questioning was unnervingly calm, almost attached. She exhibited no tears, no signs of guilt, no flicker of understanding regarding the enormity of her actions. When presented with the overwhelming evidence, the photographs of the squalor, the descriptions of her children's emaciated bodies, the detailed accounts of their physical and psychological torment, her response was not one of repentance, but of cold, calculating justification. She articulated a perverse logic, a twisted rationale that painted her actions not as abuse, but as necessary discipline. In her distorted worldview, she genuinely believed she was instilling order, teaching obedience, and preparing her children for a harsh world. She described confinement as a way to control their bad behavior and prevent them from causing trouble. The starvation was portrayed as a means to teach them gratitude or to make them strong. The physical beatings were characterized as essential tools for correction and for instilling respect. She referred to the children almost as possessions, not individuals with rights or feelings, viewing them as entities to be controlled and molded according to her will. This chilling absence of empathy, this complete detachment from the profound suffering she had inflicted, was perhaps the most disturbing aspect of her confession. It underscored the severity of her psychological state, a mind so warped that it could rationalize unspeakable cruelty as a form of care. Her motive, therefore, was not born from a moment of uncontrolled rage, but from a deeply entrenched pathology, a systematic worldview that allowed her to normalize and justify her brutal actions. She saw no wrong in what she did, no moral failing, only a distorted sense of parental duty. This meant that the suffering of the children was not incidental. It was an integral part of her warped disciplinary regimen. The children, as victims, were subjected to a calculated campaign of terror and deprivation, meticulously enforced by a mother who saw them as subject to her control, rather than beings deserving of love, nourishment, and protection. The investigators, accustomed to dealing with the darker side of humanity, were nevertheless profoundly shaken by her cold detachment. It served as a stark reminder that some forms of evil defy conventional understanding, rooted not in a single moment of madness, but in a pervasive, deeply disturbing psychological framework. The children, unknowingly, had become living experiments in her private, horrific world, their lives reduced to a testament of her unbridled cruelty and profound mental illness. Understanding her motive was not about excusing her actions, but about fully grasping the systematic and devastating nature of the abuse they had endured, making their suffering the ultimate focus of the unfolding legal battle. Her rationalizations, devoid of any genuine emotion, only amplified the horrific reality of the children's sustained agony, proving that their victimhood was not accidental, but the chilling result of her deliberate and systematic torment. With the horrifying truth laid bare by the children's testimonies, the forensic evidence, and Sarah's chillingly detached confession, the machinery of justice moved with deliberate and unwavering force. Sarah was arrested and formally charged with multiple counts of child abuse, neglect, and unlawful imprisonment. The news of the House of Horrors sent a shockwave far beyond the suburban neighborhood, capturing national attention and igniting widespread outrage. The public demanded justice for the voiceless victims, a fervent desire that resonated deeply with the prosecuting team. The preparation for the trial was immense and complex. The prosecution, spearheaded by a dedicated team of legal professionals, faced a unique challenge. While the evidence of the children's suffering was overwhelming, presenting the full, devastating scope of their trauma in a courtroom required immense sensitivity and strategic planning. Their primary goal was not just to secure a conviction, but to ensure that the children's stories were heard, their pain acknowledged, and their future protected. The legal process became, in essence, a platform to finally give voice to the voiceless. The trial itself was a grueling, emotionally charged spectacle that unfolded over several weeks. The courtroom was consistently packed, not only with media from across the country, but also with child advocates, community members, and concerned citizens who had followed the case with a heavy heart. Every day, new, agonizing details emerged, painting a picture of unimaginable deprivation and cruelty. The prosecution began by systematically establishing the deplorable conditions within the house. Photographs, meticulously taken by the initial responding officers and forensic teams, were projected onto large screens for the jury to see. These weren't just snapshots of clutter. They were stark, visceral images of decay, floors encrusted with years of filth, rotting food fused into carpets, mattresses soaked with urine and feces, and walls smeared with unidentifiable grime. Expert witnesses, including sanitation specialists and public health officials, testified to severe health hazards present, explaining the pervasive stench, the rodent infestations, and the sheer toxicity of the environment the children were forced to inhabit. Their testimonies detailed how these conditions alone constituted severe neglect, creating a living space that actively jeopardized the children's physical well-being. Next, the prosecution presented the evidence of confinement and physical abuse. Officers testified to finding makeshift restraints fashioned from belts and ropes tied to bedposts and doorframes, clearly designed to immobilize. Forensic experts analyzed the residue on these restraints, confirming long-term usage. They explained how these restraints had inflicted abrasions and bruises consistent with prolonged binding, causing both physical pain and psychological distress. The children's medical records, presented by pediatricians and child welfare workers, detailed the skeletal frames, signs of chronic malnutrition, developmental delays, and the countless untreated injuries found upon their rescue. Doctors described the old fractures that had healed incorrectly, the untreated infections, and the overall physical degradation consistent with years of systematic starvation and physical violence. Each medical term, each clinical observation, painted a vivid picture of the children's constant agony. Perhaps the most powerful and heartbreaking testimonies came from the child psychologists and social workers who had worked directly with the rescued children. They explained in careful, compassionate terms how the children's voices, though small and hesitant, revealed the full extent of their psychological torment. They spoke of the children's profound fear, their distrust of adults, their inability to form secure attachments, and their limited vocabulary and social skills. They detailed how the children used play therapy to reenact scenes of starvation and confinement, how their drawings, shown to the jury, much like in the earlier case, depicted cages, dark figures, and figures crying tears, echoing the specific traumatic experiences they had endured. The experts carefully interpreted these nonverbal cues, translating the children's profound trauma into understandable terms for the jury. They described the lasting impact of such sustained deprivation on a developing mind, outlining how the children would likely face lifelong challenges with trust, emotional regulation, and cognitive development. The mother's defense attempted to deflect responsibility, arguing that her severe mental health issues rendered her incapable of understanding the gravity of her actions. They presented psychiatric evaluations suggesting her distorted reality, her belief that her actions were discipline. They tried to portray her as a victim of her own illness, deserving of institutionalization rather than incarceration. However, the prosecution countered this by demonstrating that despite her mental illness, her actions were deliberate, sustained, and methodical. They argued that her capacity for planning, for maintaining a false facade to the outside world, and for actively concealing her crimes proved she possessed the criminal intent necessary for conviction. They emphasized that while mental illness could explain some aspect of her behavior, it could not excuse the systematic torture inflicted upon defenseless children. The very act of staging a hidden life, of ensuring no outsiders gained access, spoke volumes about a conscious effort to perpetuate the abuse. The mother herself remained largely impassive throughout the proceedings, a stark contrast to the tears and anguish of the victim's advocates. During her brief testimony, she reiterated her justifications, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. She insisted she was a good mother and that her children were disobedient, deserving of her discipline. This chilling lack of remorse, her inability to acknowledge the suffering she had caused, served only to underscore the prosecution's argument that she posed an extreme danger and that her actions were not merely a symptom of illness, but a chosen path of cruelty. After weeks of testimony, the jury retired for deliberation. The tension in the courtroom was palpable, a collective holding a breath for the fate of the children who had endured so much. The verdict, when it finally came, was a resounding confirmation of their suffering. Guilty on all counts of child abuse, neglect, and unlawful imprisonment. The judge, visibly moved by the evidence presented, delivered a powerful and unequivocal sentencing, a life sentence without the possibility of parole. This was not just a legal victory. It was a profound declaration that society would not tolerate such horrific acts against its most vulnerable. The children, though unable to fully grasp the complexities of the legal system, had received the ultimate validation of their suffering, and a measure of justice had been secured. The legal proceedings served as a testament to their resilience, transforming their silent cries into a powerful demand for accountability. With the chilling finality of the gavel and the pronouncement of a life sentence for Sarah, a grim chapter closed, but another, far more hopeful one began. The immediate priority, now that justice had been legally served, shifted entirely to the children who had endured years of unimaginable suffering. Rescued from their house of horrors, they were immediately enveloped by the protective embrace of the state. The first step in their long journey was intensive medical attention. Their small, fragile bodies, ravaged by years of starvation and neglect, required immediate and comprehensive care. Doctors meticulously addressed severe malnutrition, administering specialized dietary plans to slowly reintroduce nutrients and rebuild their physical strength without overwhelming their compromised systems. They treated countless untreated infections, from severe skin conditions to respiratory ailments, all direct consequences of living in such unsanitary conditions. Old fractures that had healed improperly were assessed, some requiring corrective procedures. Dental teams worked to repair years of decay and neglect. Beyond the immediate physical ailments, comprehensive health assessments revealed significant developmental delays across the board. Some children struggle with basic motor skills, while others have profound language deficits. Their voices barely whispers, their understanding of the world severely limited by years of isolation. The medical care they received was not just about treating wounds. It was about rebuilding their physical foundations, literally coaxing their bodies back to a state of health. Concurrently with their physical recovery, intensive psychological support became paramount. These children carried invisible wounds far deeper than any physical scar. They had known only fear, hunger, and cruelty. Therapists specializing in severe childhood trauma were brought in, employing a range of gentle, patient techniques. For children who had learned that trust was a dangerous illusion, building a therapeutic relationship was a painstakingly slow process. Play therapy became a crucial tool, allowing them to express the inexpressible through toys and symbolic actions. Art therapy provided an outlet for the terror they had witnessed, allowing them to draw their inner landscapes of fear and confinement. Gradually, over countless hours, they began to process their trauma, to understand that their experiences were not their fault, and that the world outside the house of horrors could be a place of safety and care. They learned to identify emotions, to trust kind voices, and slowly, tentatively, to hope. The goal was not to erase their past, but to equip them with the tools to process it, to integrate it, and to ultimately build a future free from its pervasive shadow. This psychological rebuilding was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, even in its most vulnerable forms. As the children began their slow, arduous path toward recovery, the wider community of Willow Creek, and indeed the nation, responded with an overwhelming outpouring of empathy and support. The shocking nature of the case had touched countless hearts, inspiring a collective desire to help mend the lives that had been so brutally broken. Local community centers became hubs for organizing aid. Volunteers poured in, offering their time, skills, and resources. Donation drives were launched, collecting clothing, toys, books, and essential supplies for children. Fundraisers were organized, raising significant sums to cover their ongoing medical treatments, specialized therapies, and long-term care. Psychologists and social workers from neighboring cities offered their expertise pro bono, contributing to the comprehensive support network. The community's efforts went beyond material aid. There was a palpable shift in collective awareness, a renewed emphasis on vigilance and interconnectedness. Neighbors who had previously been reluctant to interfere now established neighborhood watch groups, fostering stronger communication and encouraging reporting of any suspicious activity, no matter how minor. Schools implemented enhanced child protection training for staff, focusing on recognizing the subtle signs of abuse and neglect. Local government agencies reviewed and strengthened child welfare protocols, seeking to identify and intervene in similar situations before they escalated to such horrific extremes. The children's ordeal, tragic as it was, became a catalyst for positive change, a harsh lesson learned and acted upon, forging a stronger, more protected community fabric. This collective rallying provided not just material comfort, but a profound sense of belonging. showing the children that a caring world existed beyond the walls of their former prison. The case of the evil mother's house of horrors reverberated far beyond Willow Creek, resonating through legal, social, and psychological discourse across the nation. It served as a stark and undeniable reminder of the importance of community awareness and the critical need to report suspicious activities. The message was clear. Silence can be complicity. Every unusual odor, every persistently drawn curtain, every child rarely seen, every faint cry dismissed could be a warning sign. It highlighted the collective responsibility of citizens to look out for the welfare of all, especially the most vulnerable among them. Authorities emphasize that it is always better to report concern that turns out to be unfounded than to let a child suffer in silence. Furthermore, the case underscored the critical role of law enforcement and social services in protecting vulnerable individuals from abuse. It was a powerful vindication of the police officers who, on that initial missing child call, had peered beyond the surface and bravely navigated the unspeakable squalor to uncover the truth. It highlighted the vital, often harrowing, work of child protection agencies who tirelessly investigate reports, remove children from dangerous environments, and work to provide them with safety and healing. The collaborative effort between law enforcement, medical professionals, child psychologists, and social workers in this case became a model for how complex child abuse cases should be handled, emphasizing a multidisciplinary approach centered on the victim's needs. It showcased the dedication of professionals who, despite the emotional toll, commit themselves to upholding the rights and safety of children. In its ultimate conclusion, the story of the evil mother's house of horrors is not just a tale of depravity and justice. It is a profound and poignant testament to the resilience of the human spirit, particularly the incredible strength of children. The young victims, though scarred, began their arduous journey of healing, slowly reclaiming their childhoods and proving that even after enduring unimaginable torment, the capacity for recovery and growth remains. Their journey, from the depths of despair to the hopeful dawn of recovery, became a powerful narrative of survival. This case stands as an enduring symbol, a call to vigilance that echoes across communities. It serves as a grim reminder that horrors can sometimes hide in plain sight, behind seemingly ordinary doors. But it also offers a hopeful message that through increased awareness, unwavering dedication from professionals, and the compassionate rallying of communities, even the most deeply hidden suffering can be brought to light, justice can be served, and the most vulnerable among us can find a path toward healing and a future free from fear. The children, once silent victims, now stand as living testaments to a shared responsibility and the enduring power of compassion to overcome even the darkest of evils. Their journey, though marked by unimaginable pain, ultimately became a powerful narrative of hope, emphasizing that every child deserves to live in safety, nurturing, and dignity, free from the shadow of hidden horrors.
Thank you for watching. Like, share, and subscribe for more.